Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is an episode of It Came From the Network. Now if you've seen the show before, if you've seen It Came From the Network, we specialize in the weird, wild, camp, sometimes downright strange things that can be found on the WWE Network. Now, this necessarily doesn't fit in any of those categories, but it's more of an anomaly. It's long time been considered the holy grail of missing wrestling footage, and it was from Georgia Championship Wrestling, 1983, the last Battle of Atlanta. This was the feud ender for Tommy Wildfire Rich versus Buzz Sawyer, who had a years-long feud in the making. It was violent, it was brutal. A lot of us, I was just barely getting into wrestling at the time, and I knew of the feud through the After magazines, The Wrestler, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. They would give you reports and such from each territory at the time, including Georgia Championship Wrestling, which happened to be on TBS, which was actually the first nationwide wrestling show. Vince McMahon and WWF came later, actually. This was the one that went national before anybody else did. As far as the cable era, because back in the 50s there was a show that, basically the NWA had on, that was on NBC, but I digress. Let's get right down to the nitty-gritty. The actual match. Now, again, like I've stated, this was a years-long feud, so it had to end in a different way. A cage match had been done, a no-holds-barred match. So what did they do? Well, they put a cage and put a roof on it. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does. This match is said to have been the inspiration for Hell in a Cell, for War Games, for matches of that ilk where there is a roof on the top of the cage. Now, along with that, one of the stipulations was Buzz Sawyer's manager, Precious Paul Ellerling, would be put in his own cage. And we've seen that as well, where managers are put in a cage so they can't interfere. We go into the match to talk about the cage first. It looks like your standard cage, and they just got some extra, chain link fencing and draped it over the top with some poles. It didn't look super secure or super safe. Nothing that I could see anybody climbing to the top of, a la Mick Foley, but it served its purpose. It was meant to keep the two guys in. And the interesting thing about this is it was just that. Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer, no referee in the match, when inside the cage. When a pinfall would be there, or a count-out situation where they were both down or one was knocked down, you would hear the ref counting over the PA system, which also is interesting, talking about the sounds of this. The video that's on the WWE Network has no commentary. Supposedly, and the story goes, the WWE archivist who was on Twitter said that this was just found on a reel that said "Wrestling from the Omni." That's the official story. Whether we believe it or not, there's a lot of other rumors out there how they got their hands on the tape. But it makes sense that a live event reel would not have any commentary. It also looks like it to have been shot on one consistent hard camera, not different camera angles. But getting into the match itself, now that I've digressed all over the place, it was a pretty awesome match in my opinion. To me, it lived up to the hype. Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer went out there. It was violent. It looked like a real fight. It looked like there was real animosity between the two. It looked like they were not holding back any punches, and they were just going out there and beating the piss out of each other for the sake of ending this feud. And that's the way a feud ender should look. It should look like this. It should be violent. It should look like there's danger to either man. It should look like either guy can win. It should be the culmination of however long the feud would be and how long they built up to this, which this was perfect. Tommy Rich, the face, one of the big faces in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and for people of my generation and younger, it's hard to imagine how big of a face he was in that promotion. A lot of us remember him later in his NWA run, when he really wasn't the same as Tommy Rich was back then. At this point, I believe this was after his NWA title run, but don't quote me. If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will put it down there in the comments. But he was pretty much the Hulk Hogan of that territory, or John Cena, or for lack of a better term, the Vern Gagne or the Von Erichs. He was the main face of Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he was super over, and the fans wanted him to win. They rallied behind him. He was a white-hot babyface. Picks up the win on Buzz Sawyer as a stipulation of this, and this is something I actually didn't know because nothing I've ever read reported this part of the match. As a stipulation, Paul Ellering had to get in the ring with Ole Anderson afterwards. So they lock Ole Anderson and Paul Ellering in the cage, which gives us a second match in this. Ole and Paul wasn't as great as he had the first match. The first match, in my opinion, lives up to the hype. It was a great match. Definitely one of the better matches I've seen, especially when you take into effect error and timing. To me, wrestling is something that I could take a match from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and if it's a great match, regardless of the style that was prevalent at the time, whether it be All Japan, New Japan, ECW, WCW, WWE, Ring of Honor, any promotion of any time, if you have a great match, it will stand the test of time. And this did that. It definitely stood the test of time. Ole Anderson and Paul Ellering, it is what it was. I mean, by this point, Paul Ellering's knee had been badly damaged, which caused him to retire from being a professional wrestler and made him into a manager. So it was more of an Ole beating down Paul Ellering, which we see the face obviously gets a comeuppance. Afterwards, we see a very young Jake the Snake Roberts come in and attack Ole Anderson, being that Jake was part of Paul Ellering's stable, which fittingly, here's a little piece of trivia for you guys out there, was called the Legion of Doom. That's right. The Legion of Doom at one point wasn't only the Road Warriors. It was the Road Warriors, it was Buzz Sawyer, it was Jake Roberts, it was King Kong Bundy, it was a Spoiler. There were several members of the group. It wasn't just the guys that you know. But I digress. So they did that. Ole picks up the win. Jake does his little run-in thing. Tommy Rich runs him off. Your basic end to a manager getting beat up in a feud. But all in all, a pretty great showing. Something I highly recommend anybody that has a WWE network going and watching. And with that being said, we're going to go right into our rating system. Now, we have a scale here. It's a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. So 1's a Gobbledygooker, 2's a Renegade, 3's a Hurricane Helms, 4 is a Goldust, and 5 is a Kane. I'm going to give this a 5, a Kane. Like I said, to me, the match, and knowing the background of the match, made it a great find, a great match. One of the matches that I'm going to go back to over and over and watch over and over again. Much akin to Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA from Starrcade 85 in Ric Flair and Terry Funk in their famous I Quit match. Just the kind of violence and brutality that sells a feud, that sells you wanting to go back and watch it multiple times, in my opinion. To me, that's a selling point. I give it a 5, give it a Kane. I think it's a great match. Definitely something that every wrestling fan should go back and check out. But with that being said, that's basically all I have to say about this. My name is George Coles, and you've watched an episode of It Came From the Network.